Hello, I'm Greg Baird, one of the seed advisors at Unity Seeds, focusing on the state of Pennsylvania, among others. We're glad you chose to attend our webinar today. As the average age of the American farmer approaches 60, the ability to transfer farm ownership effectively within the family is a concern. I am confident you will find real value in the information our guest speaker will share with us today. We will be hearing from Dr. Robert Taylor, Purdue University Professor Emeritus, Agricultural Economics. Bob Taylor taught farm management and economics at Purdue University for 50 years, educating more than 40,000 students in his classrooms. Through his extension work, he specialized in the area of helping farmers transfer their farm business to the next generation. He is currently retired, living near his extended family in the Lafayette, Indiana area. During the presentation, I would encourage everyone to feel free at any time to enter questions that come to mind in the chat box. Dr. Taylor, good morning, and we turn it over to you.
Hey, good morning. Look forward to doing this. This is fun. It turns out that when I was a professor at Purdue, one of the common questions that I was asked was, I think I'd like to be a farmer. I'd like to raise thousands of acres of corn and beans and livestock, but I don't have a farm and I don't even know anybody who's got a farm. How do you get started in farming? And the answer basically is you can't do it alone. There are lots and lots of older farmers, and many of them are interested in finding some young person to farm with them. And almost every farmer that gets started got started with another farmer. And so when you think about farms, you think about two generations, a young guy and an old guy. And I'm going to talk about this as if you're talking about a father-son arrangement. And that'll catch 95% of the farms that I've worked with here in Indiana, is that the father brings his boy into the business. Now, when I talk about a father or a son, I'm talking about the role that they play. Older farmer, younger farmer. You see, it really doesn't make any difference whether it's a father-son arrangement or a mother-son arrangement or a father-daughter arrangement or uncle-nephew or a high school teacher and one of his students. You got two generations, an older guy who's got a whole bunch of farm assets and who's getting tired, and a young guy who doesn't have much but energy and optimism, and he's ready to go. So we talk about these two generations. And you can just guess that I was a pretty fortunate fellow to deal with many, many farm businesses, most of them healthy, where things were going well. But you can just guess that not all the businesses that I dealt with were going well. What happened when I ran into a farm business that was troubled? And by that I mean they had income problems, but they also usually had a whole bunch of other problems. When I found a troubled farm business, the single most common reason for that trouble was that the people didn't get along well. Often it was the father and the son that didn't get along very well. Sometimes it was the mother and the son. Sometimes it was the daughter-in-law. And the reason for them not getting along varied widely. It just depended on who they were and what their interests were. But if you didn't get along very well with the people you're trying to be a partner with, things will go badly. And when I think about it, I've got 4 delightful children, but it would be easier for me to farm with some of them than with others of them. That's just the way it is. And so when you think about getting started in farming and you think about who you might farm with, it's important to think about, is this the kind of person that I would get along with easily and well? And if it isn't, if he isn't the kind of person you would just enjoy working with day in and day out, even when things aren't going very well, then you'd better think about it pretty carefully, because if the people don't get along well, this is a disaster that's going to happen. The second reason why there are troubled farm businesses is that the business is too small. Technology is changing all the time. The size of the most economic farm is getting larger and larger. If you're only 5 years out of date, you're probably too small. And the key thing with that is you don't have income enough. And you've got to have income enough so that both members of the partnership are earning well and things are going well. If there isn't enough income to go around, there's going to be great unhappiness. The third thing that made these businesses troubled businesses is that they had some kind of a dumb operating agreement. Now, I found that people were remarkably creative at coming up with their own dumb operating agreement. And I'll just give you one example. There was a Purdue student who graduated and then got his master's degree, then worked for Extension for several years, and then his family invited him to come home and farm with them. He had been home farming with them for a while and was pretty frustrated. Came to see me, and we were just visiting about the general agreement, the arrangement. And it turned out when I asked him how he was paid, he told me that he had to keep track of his hours and he was paid the minimum wage. Now that is a dumb operating agreement. And of course that had to change in order for that business to be successful. And so it's pretty important to think about what kind of an operating agreement really makes sense. But when you think about getting started in farming, you want to think about two generations, a younger generation and an older generation, and how they're going to work together to make this whole thing work. When you think about the issues that are involved with farming together, choosing your partner wisely is the single biggest. And if you don't do that one right, it's not going to go well, even if you do everything else perfectly. Then you need to think about improving working relations. And everybody can improve how they get along with people and how they work together well, and we want to put a lot of emphasis there. Get that farm profitable enough. If there isn't profit enough to pay the income of both partners so that they're satisfied, it's just going to be a disaster. Use a wise business arrangement. Now, it isn't that there's one wise arrangement. You can do it right lots and lots of different ways, but there are a few things that just won't work. And what you want to do is to try to avoid those. So when you think about farming together, these are the things that you need to think about. Choosing your partner wisely, improving working relations, getting that farm profitable enough, and then using a wise business arrangement. When you think about choosing your partner, you want to choose somebody who's one of the best. Certainly when these seniors at Purdue get ready to graduate, they're going to interview with people who want to hire them. And it's the job of the interviewer and the interviewee to evaluate the other and see if this is a business they want to join, if this is a kind of person that they want to invite in. And he'd better be one of the best. So when you look at a farm business, or you look at any business, do they know where they're going? Do they have a good plan? Do they have a good product? Do they have good people who have a sense of flexibility and are successful at what they're doing and got plans for how they're going to continue to do it well? And so when you look at Dad, is Dad one of the best crop producers in your county? Is he one of the best livestock men in your county? One of the best marketers in your county? If somebody came to the county extension educator and said, who are 3 of the best farmers in your county, would your dad's name come up? Or are you tying in with a proven loser? You want to make sure that you're picking one of the best. And when old Dad looks at that boy, and the question is he one of the hardest workers he knows? Is he one of the most responsible people he knows? Is he one of the best informed? Is he checking out new technology and evaluating it with a sharp eye? Or is he inviting that guy to come in to farm with him just to save yourself the awful embarrassment of having a kid on welfare. So you want to pick somebody who's one of the best. You want to pick somebody who's a good communicator. Does that mean somebody that talks a lot? No, 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 no. The university is full of people who talk and talk and talk and don't say anything. You want to find somebody who will say, you know, I like this tremendous increase in yields and productivity that we've had from raising these GMO crops. On the other hand, you don't have any trouble hearing that there are a lot of people in this world who are a little bit nervous about GMO crops. Should we switch from this winning combination that we've been using of raising GMO crops back to raising non-GMO crops? That's tempting. It looks like the market's going to be excellent. On the other hand, if we switch back and that market isn't as good as it looks like it's going to be, that could be a terrible mistake. You know, that kind of a guy you can talk to, that kind of a guy you can argue with. That's the kind of person who's a good communicator. The guy who says, look, Buster, my way or the highway is not nearly as much fun to work with. Find somebody who's a good communicator. Find somebody who has similar goals. Somebody's headed in the same direction. One of the things I've discovered is that when I've talked to the Purdue students often, they didn't have a clue what mom or dad's primary, professional, and personal goals were. Well, it's pretty hard to line up your goals with somebody that you don't know what their goals are. Now, the place I saw this rub was old Dad, who'd been farming for a long time and was getting old and getting tired, and he was ready to back off. He's ready to take life a little easy, ready to transfer some of these miserable, hard jobs, some of these tricky technology jobs to the son. He was ready to take life a little easy. The boy, he's ready to tear him up. And those two guys were just going to be banging heads because they weren't headed in the same direction. Find somebody who has similar goals. Find somebody who already is the kind of person that you want to be a partner with, not somebody that you hope you might change to be that kind of partner. And the world is strewn with the wreckages of marriages where that girl took that guy knowing that when she got him, she'd shape him up. Well, marriage partners don't shape up very well, and neither do farm business partners shape up very well. If he's not the kind of person that you want to be in a partnership now, then you just wait and don't even think about it until that guy has changed to be, and there's no guarantee that he will change to be the kind of partner that you want. So choose a partner who's one of the best. Find one who's a good communicator. If he has similar goals, that's a huge plus. And find somebody who already is the kind of guy you want to be a partner with. Don't pick somebody you think you can shape up. It doesn't work like that. When you think about farming together, the issue of communication is terribly important. I run into lots of people in farm businesses who say, we are primarily successful because we're good communicators. We have frequent meetings. We tell each other what we think. We work out the difficulties. We don't let problems build and build and then explode. On the other hand, I run into lots of farm businesses where they tell us that things are not going so well because they're not very good communicators, that they just don't know how to communicate very well. Communication has to do with the idea of transferring ideas. When you get an idea of how things ought to be, then you talk to your partner about changing things around so that you can take advantage of this good idea. We are not talking about complaining about the mistakes that your partner has made. These are positive, good ideas that you're trying to communicate and get incorporated into your business. Now, it's not easy to do communication. And one of the reasons it's not easy is that we're afraid that the persons that you're dealing with won't like what you think and what you want. And so we are so careful in how we say it that they don't understand us. It's not easy to communicate. You gotta talk straight. You gotta tell them what you're thinking. Don't ram it down their throat. Just tell them what you're thinking and why you're thinking it. How you say it may be more important than what you say. And when you say it, some people think if you don't say anything, it communicates volumes, but I don't believe that. And I think it usually communicates wrong ideas. I've seen dads that when the kids goof up, think that the best way to deal with it is to just get mad and scream at them. And getting mad and screaming at the kids has to be one of the poorest ways there is of communication. You can be hurt if the people around you really know what you're thinking. They can get pretty disgusted with you. As a matter of fact, they may not even want to be in a business with you if they really know what you're thinking. And there's always that chance. So you can be hurt if you communicate accurately with your partners. But it's better to find that out early than late. One of the questions that I've learned to ask the people in a farm business to see how healthy it is to ask them how they deal with differences of opinion. When one guy thinks we ought to go one way and the other guy thinks we ought to go the other way, how do you deal with that? And surprisingly to me, I hear often the guys say, well, you know, that may be a problem for somebody else, but that's not much of a problem for us. We don't have very many differences of opinion. When I can tell you, if there is a farm business and it's got a young guy and an old guy and they're farming together and there's never any differences of opinion, it means that business is sick. It means that one guy isn't thinking or isn't talking. There are going to be differences of opinion. There are going to be differences of opinion. Now, it's how you deal with them that counts. And one of the things you've got to realize is that it's awfully easy to think when there's a difference of opinion that it's because your partner is stupid. But that often is not the case. It may be that you know something he doesn't know. Maybe he knows something you don't know. Tell him. Listen to him. Don't just assume it's stupidity. It's more likely to be ignorance. Issues have two sides. When you think about continuing with GMOs or changing, I mean, there are good reasons for going each way. And it's only when you understand both sides that it makes any sense to have a conversation. If it looks to you like there's only one way to do it, if you got a brain in your head, then you're not ready to talk about it yet. There are good reasons for it to go in each way, and it's only when you understand both sides that it really makes sense to talk about it. Your best bet when you have a difference of opinion with your partner is to listen very carefully to what he says, and then see if you can respectfully and quietly repeat to him what it was he's been screaming at you. See if he can tell you what you've been screaming at him. Listen, repeat. That's the best test there is of communication. And when somebody says, look, hey, what was it that I just said? You want to do your very best to reply and just as accurately and completely as you can. It's the best single test there is to see if communication has actually taken place. Praise publicly, criticize privately. It just turns out that this is a mistake that lots of people make. I see these young guys at the coffee shop telling the three dumbest things that their dad did this last week. Well, don't do that. Don't do that. You got something good to say about Dad? That's the thing to tell about at the coffee shop. You think Dad's made a mistake? You deal with him one-on-one, out behind a barn, preferably with a tractor running. Praise publicly, criticize privately. And the secret to all that is to listen carefully to what you hear and then think about it. How come Gramps said what he said yesterday when he left? How come Mom was mad this morning? Listen. Think. The heart of communication. Listen. Think. When you think about a farm partnership agreement, that's an important piece of business. And in Indiana, you don't need to have a written agreement. Oral agreements are legally enforceable, but they're not very smart. You want to have a written agreement so everybody can read it and see what's there and to know exactly what it says and what each guy's responsibility is. Have a written agreement. My dream is that when you get ready to have a written agreement, each guy in the business, and when I think about that, I'm talking about mom, dad, son, daughter-in-law. Each one ought to sit down and write out what they think the agreement ought to be separately. Then sit down together and go through them. And what you're going to discover, of course, is that one guy has thought of something that the other three hadn't. Two guys will have thought of something else and the other two haven't. So that's where you put together all your good ideas and you rough out what ought to be in it and you resolve differences of opinion. Most of the time it'll be a matter of adopting one guy's ideas to the other because it's better. Sometimes there'll be chances where you get a chance to really talk about whether it ought to be A or B. But get a rough draft. Get something that the four of you can somewhat agree with. Then take it to the attorney. Now the attorney will read down through it and he'll say, hey, did you really mean? And often you'll say, no, I really didn't mean that. Well, that's what you've got written here. So it needs to be repaired. Now, a mistake that's easy to make is to say, you know, this is important, this is a big deal. We're going to go to our attorney and ask him for a written agreement. And he'll come up with one. He's got a bunch of them there, and it'll work really well for a hardware store, but not for your farm. You want to get one that's designed to meet the needs of your farm. And you take that to the attorney and let him look at it and help you to see what you can put together that works best. What goes into that agreement? Well, the parts, you got to decide on what parts of the business are in the partnership agreement. And here we're talking about if old dad has a seed corn business, is that in the partnership or is that dad's? If the boy has a semi that he uses to haul grain, is that his or is that in the partnership business? One guy's got some Christmas trees, and is that his or is that part of the partnership? And you've got to decide what's in and what's out. You've got to decide who is a partner, who's an employee. Well, usually old dad and the boy are going to be partners, but what about mom? Is she an employee or is she a partner? What about the daughter-in-law? Is she an employee or is she a partner? What about the 15-year-old brother? Is he a partner or is he an employee? You've got to decide who's in, who's out. Then individuals are going to make decisions. Should there be limits on the individual decision making? In other words, under what circumstances does one of the partners have to say, I got to talk to my other partners before we can make this decision? Would it be all right for that 15-year-old to stop at the widow who's mad, who's got that 640 acres, and she's mad at her tenant and cash rent it for the next 5 years for 350 an acre? Would that be okay, or should the whole group have to make that kind of a decision? What limits do you put on individual decision making? Then who contributes what? And for example, the boy's pickup truck, is that part of the farm business or is that his? Who contributes what? When they say he's going to work full time, does that mean 40 hours a week or 100 hours a week? The land, who contributes what land to the farm. And of course you need to think about the payments. How much is that boy going to be paid for his labor? How much is the rent going to be on that land? How much is the payment going to be for that combine? So you got to have who's going to contribute what and how much is the payment going to be. Now, somebody's going to figure out they're going to sell corn, you're going to buy fertilizer, you're going to pay for land rent, you're going to pay for leasing machinery. And when you get all done, there ought to be some profits. How are they going to be shared? And of course, if there's a father and two sons, then maybe they should be split a third, a third, a third. But more likely, you want to share those profits based on the amount of contribution to the business, because some people are able to deal with risk easier than others. So my recommendation is to share profits and losses proportional to the contributions that are made to the business. When you start a partnership, a corporation, any kind of a business arrangement, of course you're setting it up new. Will it last forever? Answer is it won't. Well, how do you get out? And rather than letting the whole thing just build and build and build and finally explode all over the county, you've got to figure out how is this partnership or business arrangement going to be dissolved? How's the notice going to be given? If they're out there working on hogs one morning and one of the sows bites that boy in the leg, can he just scream right there in the middle of the hog yard that he wants out? And is that the end of it? Or does he have to have a written notice? And of course, I would recommend a written notice, and I would say it ought to be handled a little bit like the way we deal with land rental, where if you're not going to farm that land next year, you have to give notice by the 1st of December of this year. And I'd say you ought to have the same kind of advance notification on labor. Well, when you split up, if you dissolve the business arrangement, then how are the assets going to be divided? And sometimes one guy is going to continue to farm and the other guy isn't. And so you're going to have stuff evaluated, or maybe you're going to have an auction. And each of the partners can bid and the neighbor can bid. And that way things will get split up. I know a farm business where they were both going to continue to farm and they had a beef herd. And so one guy, one of the partners, put the cows into two groups and the other guy chose which group he wanted. And so you got to have a system for figuring out how they're going to be dissolved. And there's lots and lots of ways of doing it. Okay, so now we're thinking about having that son come into the business. Are there logical starting and ending points? And the answer is yes, there are. The first thing you ought to do is that the young guy ought to provide labor. And why? Because he's young and rugged and it's easy for him to do them and less painful for him. So he's going to do a lot of the labor. But if all he does is labor, he isn't worth much more than the minimum wage. He's got to be involved with management. And my recommendation is that you break off a small part of that farm business, put the young guy in charge of making decisions on that small part, and give him a chance to practice with his management. And to reduce vested interest problems where how the business arrangement dictates how the decisions are made, the boy ought to provide operating capital. He ought to own some breeding stock. I'd like it if the boy owned 25% of the, or put up 25% of the fertilizer and had 25% of the corn. He had 25% of the hogs. And so when he had 25% of the fertilizer in the corn, if it made sense to him to put on more fertilizer, it was even better for Dad. When they got ready to decide whether to feed those pigs longer or to sell the corn, 25% of the hogs went to the boy, 25% of the corn went to the boy. That just reduces some of these vested interest problems. Then, as he continues to go, he grows into the business. He goes from 25.75 to 30.70, and then maybe 35.65. And then he gets involved by buying machinery. And he may have 25 or 30% of the machinery. Then he needs a farmstead, a place where he can keep his livestock, a place where he can keep his machinery, and a permanent base from which he can operate, and he won't get caught by having somebody jerk his farmstead out from under him. When permanence is more important than the return on investment, then you want to think about buying cropland. The return on cropland isn't near as good as the return on machinery and livestock and fertilizer and all that. But one of the things I noticed is that many of those boys who thought they were going to go home and farm would start with the idea that they were going to buy the 180 acres across the road from the house, and that's where they'd start. Well, that's not the place to start. You don't start by buying cropland, because the rate of return on investment in cropland is low. You want to start by fertilizer and livestock. It's been a joy to visit with you about getting started in farming, having 2 generations, choosing your partner wisely, thinking about how to work with him even more efficiently, how to put together a business arrangement that makes real sense, and how to think carefully about the steps that you go through to get to be a part of a farm business. If you've got questions for me, I'll be ready to deal with them in a few minutes. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Taylor. We are extremely excited about our corn hybrids for the 2015 planting season. Most of that excitement is from the performance of those hybrids in the Farmers Independent Research of Seed Technology trials, commonly known as FIRST. For example, 7914 3000 GT, a 114-day hybrid, yielded 13 bushels better per acre than the average of 54 hybrids in the 2014 Elverson, Pennsylvania FIRST trial. 7914 also placed second overall in yield in the 2014 Otterburn, Indiana FIRST trial by yielding 260.6 bushels per acre. If you are looking for an earlier maturity corn hybrid, Unity Seeds 5608 Smart Stack Rib, a 108-day hybrid, yielded 230.8 bushels per acre, which was 13.1 bushels per acre above the average of the 60 hybrids tested in the Greensburg, Indiana FIRST trial. Also, 4603 VT3 Pro Rib came in second place overall in 2 Iowa State University trials in 2013, Corwith and Sheldon. Unity Seeds has been a consistent performer for several years now in the FIRST trials and state university trials across the country. Thank you again, Dr. Taylor, for your knowledge. I know all attendees heard you loud and clear when you said that transferring the family farm business to the next generation will require great communication skills. I would also emphasize your point that blending a family and a business together really needs a written plan. Please remember to join us February 26 for our next webinar entitled High Yield Soybeans, 104 Bushels per Acre. Please check our website, unityseeds.com, for details. Thank you again for sharing some of your time with us. I hope the information was timely for all of you. Remember to call one of our seed advisors at 800-338-4558 and plant Unity Seeds for top value in your 2015 seed investment.